I'm trying to make a way, hit the bank so ends can meet. Feed my family, if you don't grind, you weak. That was me about a year ago, scared to be.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Tokens Podcast. I'm your host Stevie G, and as always, I'm here with your boy Hero.
What's going on, guys? Hello, welcome.
So, I want to start off today by saying some words, which is going to lead us right into our episode today. By the way, this is Season 2, Episode 1.
Hey.
So we made it, y'all.
Season 2.
One season down.
It's officially the launch day.
And we decided like 2 weeks ago that this was a new season.
Right.
So
it was like 2 days ago. It was like
yeah, we got some good stuff for y'all. But I do want to start off saying that our world is in a constant state of change. It's growing. And while technology is booming and our communities and way of life is changing with it, and they're going to change whether we like it or not. Truth be told, we can't be afraid of it. When we started Tokens Podcast, Hira and I thought, hey, I'm black, you're white, we're best friends despite all this racial cloud surrounding social media, big media, our government, even our friends. Let's bridge this gap and get people talking on a platform where they can understand each other like we have and still live their lives peacefully afterward. Little did we know we found ourselves having hypocritical opinions of our own, especially with our understandings of the genderqueer and transgender community. It is no secret that us cisgendered guys are confused and sometimes uncomfortable talking about non-binary culture, and sometimes those conversations get too heated for both parties to even handle. Lord knows we've had many. But we don't want to argue anymore. We want to be enlightened. We want to understand what our brains seemingly haven't been able to understand about our fellow human beings. So dudes who are listening in, pay attention, this conversation is for us. Today we are joined by a special guest who's going to keep it real and answer all of our questions about their life as a non-binary person of color, a drag king, and their collaborative work with our beautiful friends at Golden Pineapple DC.
Don't forget Burlesque Dancer.
And Burlesque Dancer. Woo! Can't forget that one.
Right.
Hopefully we'll get a show. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce ANDE. Welcome to the show.
Hey y'all, welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we're also joined by Tabitha of Golden Pineapple.
Yes.
She has been with us for the past, 5 months now?
Tabitha's been like
Hey.
a nice muse for us creatively.
I feel
and
the
help us out.
opposite of that. I feel exactly like we met at the launch party.
Mhm.
Like you guys just strolled in, started doing
Yeah,
kombucha.
we just walked in.
You guys were like, give us some kombucha cannabis shots. We'll do it down the ice luge. Tabitha just lead us. I'm like,
right.
I was like, these are my people. And I'm just so
Cards
glad.
got exchanged.
Yeah, you were like,
Yes.
here's my business card. I was like, heck yes. Like,
I'll be honest, I didn't think you were serious about coming back on the show. But I'm glad
people
you did.
always say that about me. They're like, I didn't think you were serious. I'm like, I'm the most serious, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
Which we really appreciated, because now we have opportunities like this where we have met ANDE, and we're getting to, like Steve said, we've got like some interesting nitty gritty questions.
I'm really
Yeah.
interested to know what these questions are.
So Steve put a lot of this together,
Cool,
which
cool.
I give him mad props on doing, because he's the writer, he's the actor, he does all that you know.
Okay.
So
Like,
he's done a lot
I
of
feel like
research on this.
I'm gonna come off sort of formal.
Yeah.
As I was thinking about these, I was thinking about the conversations
Well,
we
the
were having,
team
and I was
will
just
already
like,
was.
So
Yeah.
what
can't
is the
just-
difference between gender and sex?
right. But
Right.
I have those questions
Yeah.
compiled in a way that I don't think is as harsh as they sounded in my head.
Okay.
Right, a lot of the times I feel like, especially for cisgender guys, you want to say stuff and then you don't, when you say it in your head, you're like, that sounds like a dick-ass thing to say. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, I think that's the fear of the minority, though. We touched on this before. When you feel like you're the minority, you feel like you need to be perfect and project that
Sure,
to
right.
everyone around you to take up space as you should. You should feel confident to do so. So
Yeah.
take up some space. We'll share it together.
Right.
I'm down.
Well, before I jump right into the questions, Ande, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay.
In general, just
In
about your work,
general.
daily work.
In general.
What do you do?
What do I do?
The
Yeah.
DC question.
Oh,
It's so offensive.
So what
What do you do?
Well, if you ask my parents, not a lot. So, right now, I'm, taking some prereq classes because I'm trying to get into a clinical nursing leaders program, which is just, a fancy thing for, a master's in nursing if you don't have a nursing undergrad degree. I have an undergrad degree in psychology and a master's in neuroscience.
That's impressive.
Psychology
Yeah.
and neuroscience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of the stuff about the mind, even though mine's not all
Right.
And I'm also an artist, so I do visual art and performance art. So like you guys said, I'm a burlesque performer and a drag king. There's like a premier drag troupe in DC called Pretty Boy Drag. It is queer, black women produced,
Okay.
and it has a bunch of different people of different genders and races in it, which is really cool. I actually just started performing in August of last year. Like I've been a dancer, but I hadn't been performing like burlesque or as a drag king, so I'm actually really new to it, but it's actually really exciting. You get to kind of like explore different parts of yourself on stage, just like you would with like acting, for example. So that's really cool.
How many times have you performed so far?
So I was one of those people that people were like, damn, like you just started and you're but it's kind of what you were saying, like once you start doing it, you're like, I have to be the best.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm booking it. I think I've performed like 15 times for burlesque.
Okay.
I have like 4 acts. And then for drag, I performed once at like in a group thing, and I've been in like other group numbers with like other pretty boys. And actually my first like solo act is this Saturday.
Hey,
Pretty Boy After
nice.
Dark.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be hot.
And it's after dark. So what time? Saturday?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's 2 shows. There's a show that starts at 9 and there's one that starts at 11.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Both
We
after
should
dark.
definitely check that out.
Yep, you
Yeah.
should.
This is like
I
dark at
have
like
to
5
see
o'clock in
this.
the afternoon.
Yeah, it's,
Right.
it's gonna be something. I'm just saying.
That sounds dope.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Cool. So you were just talking about the burlesque dancing and drag. I feel like that leads into one of my questions that I
Okay.
have, and that is, can you just tell us what is drag, and is there a difference between drag king, or is there like what is?
Did you just
drag
say the same
king?
word twice?
Did
No,
you mean
no.
drag kings and drag queens?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Drag kings.
I think you said the same
Sorry,
word
Is that
twice.
the same thing?
My
Yeah.
bad.
Okay.
Drag kings and drag queens.
That was
Yeah,
confusing.
yeah. So, drag is like a kind of performance or performativity, because I guess in like the queer community, a lot of people do kind of do drag outside of like the traditional like on stage performance. But it is kind of the same as like drag queens. A lot of people know drag queens. You know, it's this like hyper feminization and just like this performativity of femininity. And then drag kings are kind of the same in the sense that it is usually like assigned female at birth people putting on masculine persona, facial hair, and then presenting or performing as a masculine person. But they do have, there are also like trans people. So like there's trans guys who do drag kinging. And there are even like cis women who do drag queen, and they call it like faux queen. But it's still like just important to know that it's not necessarily like, oh, we are acting as men or as women, because it's always like this like over exaggerated kind of thing where it's like, this is like the highest of femme, the highest like masculinity, but like not hyper masculine, because that's like one of the things that we regularly try to like sort of subvert, is that when you're a drag king, you don't want to just like take all the worst things about masculinity and be like, yeah, I'm gonna put this on stage, but just sort of
Sure.
trying to be like nuanced in the way that you explore what it means to be masculine.
Okay, like give me an example of something that you would like a type of show or something like that, like or like a theme behind like a dance or something like that. Like what would be like a theme
For a drag king show, you mean?
Yes,
Or for,
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I mean.
for a particular performer's dance or something?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like it's hard to say in terms of themes, but like for example with Pretty Boy Drag, we do a lot of like contemporary like hip hop and rap.
Okay,
So it's like very like like quote unquote black music.
sure.
So but then it's like that there's all this like misogyny and like homophobia steeped in like that kind of music. So it's like, how do we portray this in a way that's still inclusive?
Right.
Yeah, and I mean it's hard because there are some people that just like perform songs that are just like by people that are not necessarily the people that we want to be like promoting. Like
Sure.
like-
And that actually like that brings up a question that I had which was like the specifically
Mhm.
in talking with like rap and hip hop and stuff like that, the F word.
Yeah.
Not talking about fuck, obviously.
Mhm.
Like that is very like prominent in not only like hip hop, but then you also have like gaming culture and stuff like that. A lot of gamers like to use it like a derogatory thing. I know I play a lot of video games, and it always kind of like strikes me as like a weird. But do you is that something that you like? Do you find that offensive, or is that like not even like in your Like, are you not even thinking about that? Is that not even like in your like what realm of like of thought?
I mean, I guess that is definitely, it is offensive, and I
Sure.
guess, like, people, I don't even know that anyone I know even, like, touches that at all.
Sure.
But it's, like, then you get to, like, things like, okay, for the N-word, for example.
Right.
So if you are, like, a white person, and you're at a Pretty Boy Drag show, and a black performer is performing, and that word is in there, and it's like, you know, we always give this disclaimer, it's like, there's certain words you can't say, so even if you're in the audience singing along, don't sing it, don't mouth it,
Right.
don't get kicked out. Like, so it's like things like that I think about, and it's like, I mean, also when you think about like misogyny, for example, like there are some lyrics that are like really derogatory and vulgar towards women, and like, you know, is that something that we want to be
Sure.
up on stage personifying?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't even think about that. That's a good
Right.
point. It's a very good point.
Yeah.
That was all enlightening. I'm like,
Yeah.
I want to see a show now because I'm like envisioning all this stuff going down. I'm like, wow, I didn't even think of all the mechanics that goes into the thought process of the show and how you want to portray it while also not offending anyone as well.
Exactly,
That's
and
insane.
and
I
it can
didn't
be
think about
hard.
it
And I
at
mean,
all.
some people don't even like. I mean, you can go online and look up drag kings, and there'll definitely be people who are doing all types of, you know, not so politically correct or
Sure.
whatever.
Well, there's
things,
always
but-
going to be somebody like inciting
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
Like
but
on all sides.
like in my performance, and most of the people that I know in my drag troupe, we all are trying very hard to sort of like change the conversation around what masculinity is and what that can mean for like not men. So like, you know, like cis women who are queer performing as men, or like non-binary trans people performing masculinity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, as far as the cis community, gender community, and the pronouns and the words and the vocab that's evolving through it,
Mhm.
one of my questions that I have for you is, what pronouns offend you and why? And are they important in the conversation at all?
So, like, no pronouns are inherently offensive.
Mhm.
So it's like pronouns, you know, you have he, she, he, him, like, you know, they, them, and there are other ones like, you know, z, zero. It's really just about asking someone what their pronouns are and then using that. And I
Right.
think a big thing is that, like, you know, society's so gendered, and what we think of as, you know, men and women, we kind of have, like, you know, our schema in our mind. So it's
Sure.
like you see somebody, excuse me, sir. And it's like you're just making all these assumptions about this person, whereas like, you know, we should try to like avoid like just like inadvertently gendering people through pronouns.
Mhm.
But it's not like saying like she, her pronouns are not offensive, they're just not the ones that I use.
Right.
Right? But it's like when people see me as a femme-identified person, they assume she, her, and so when I go through life, usually she, her is what I hear.
Right.
So it's really just more about like, okay, well, can we sort of like move to like you said, like you just use names, or just like making it normalized where you ask people like, hey, how are you? What are your name and your pronouns? Like those are two important things. Like
Sure.
you wouldn't call someone the wrong name,
Right.
and your pronouns are basically just a fill-in for a name.
Oh no, I get that all the time,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Hi, I'm Palmer." People are like,
Paul.
they just they hear what they want to hear. So like,
Paul?
I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I used to get upset about it, but I don't anymore. Sometimes I still do. It
Mhm.
depends on the situation. Like when I'm in Starbucks, that shit pisses me off.
Yeah, but then it's also like, okay, so you've told me what your name is, and then, okay, Palmer. But then if I'm like, oh, well, I don't really care, I'm just going to call you Paul.
Right.
Then it's like, that's when
Obviously,
it
it's
becomes
like,
offensive.
you
It's
wouldn't
like
know.
you're
Like,
going
yeah.
out of your way to just like disregard me as a human being.
Yeah, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. Like if I just met you and you mess up my name, like whatever.
Exactly.
Like I'm not gonna correct you on it because like it doesn't matter. Like,
Mhm.
however though, like if you're somebody that I run into like often, and then like you keep calling me the same thing, I'm like, hey man, like
Right, exactly.
it's not my name. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
But so like there certain languages like Italian, French, Spanish, like having like being very gender specific
yeah.
in a lot of different words. Like how would something like that, like how do you feel about that? Like how
I mean,
does
it's hard, and that's like I think something that a lot of people talk about, especially like, so for example, like, you know, the Latino community. So then Latinx is the thing that's become like
Sure.
the more
Mhm.
common thing. So putting the X as opposed to the O or the A, but it's hard because even if you
I
can
didn't
do
know
that.
That's cool.
Yeah, I didn't
Oh
know
yeah.
that either.
Oh, see, I'm over here just listening.
Right? No, yo,
Yeah,
this,
so,
this is what I
I
want,
did
though.
not know
Yeah,
that.
so in
What?
the queer community and in the like trans community, just in general, people say Latinx. So like
Okay.
instead of putting Latino or Latina, it's just the X to put in the space. Just
Mhm.
like for example, you know, you have Mr. and Mrs.
We
Then
actually
you have like
just found out
mix,
about
like
that.
MX, and that's supposed to be like
Yeah,
a gender inclusive / gender neutral way of doing that. So that's easy when you're like referring to a person, but obviously it's like in Spanish, like every single word it has a gender. You know what I mean? So it's like you can't get away
French
from
is very
that.
similar too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't get away from that specifically, but it's really just more about like when you're referring to individual people who can tell you like this is my gender, just like adhering to that.
Right. Wow. So I do have some definitions that I wanted to just go over so that our audience is familiar with the terms we're using and we're not just throwing them out there assuming they know what we're talking about.
Right.
So, and you can agree or disagree with these or correct me if I'm wrong on any of these.
Okay.
Alright, so transgender applies to a person whose gender is different from their assigned sex at birth.
Yep.
Cool. Cisgender applies to
You're
someone...
like, affirmation, you're like, is that...
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
because they can be wrong.
You know, that's
like,
so
a
real
lot of
because
things
I
have
was
been
like
wrong.
reading a human growth and development book for one of my classes, and it's like explaining what gender identity is, and I was like, that's just
Right, I have
Check
heard,
your
I have heard
source.
some like
Right.
very
Right.
And I'm like, when
questionable.
was this book even published? 2016. Like, come on, y'all.
Wow.
And while going over these, still a lot of the definitions and new terms have, are still relatively new, have come out a few years ago, and I
I don't know,
haven't
man.
yet to know about
The
them.
Swedes did 2010. The Swedes introduced hen, H-E-N, which is their all collective pronoun. For,
Oh, really?
Yeah. So,
See,
so
didn't
they've
know
had
that.
it for nearly a decade. Which is
I was
pretty
thinking of just the universities in 2015 that started for freshmen coming in.
Yeah.
They started doing like introduction programs where they allow students to tell their pronoun during
Or
their
even just
introduction.
like in applications where it's
Mhm.
like,
Right.
what's your gender? And then they say like male and female. Well, first of all, male and female are not genders.
Right.
See, yeah, and that
Yeah.
and that's getting into another question that I
Yeah,
had.
and then it's like also neither. So like
Yeah.
you put your sex, but that's, you know, and it's like if you're somebody that's like your gender is like something that you're dealing with all the time, or you're having like gender identity issues or just discrimination, it's like really just triggering for no reason. It's like I just want to fill out this form, and then I have to like misgender myself and then think about how it's stupid that this is even a thing.
Right.
Why isn't there just somewhere where you could just like write it in or literally anything?
Yeah.
But like I know like Facebook only recently, like what, a couple of years ago, put, you know, allowed you for you to have like they them pronouns, like, or, you know, write in your gender, and they had like so many different ones. So.
I didn't
wish
even know
that
you could do that.
for racial options, I wish that human was one, but it isn't. So I usually write
It's
it
like a
in
race.
when I get a chance, but
The human race.
I got to pick Black American
Right.
or like Black Indian American. I just throw that in there.
Okay.
So it's like, you got a little Indian hair.
What?
Okay.
I think that's... I don't agree.
What, you don't see this Indian hair
Alright.
But anyways,
So
the
on
next
to
the
definition
the
I wanted to go
the
to
glossary that we have
was cisgender was the next one, which
Right.
is applies to someone whose gender matches their assigned sex at birth, i.e. someone who is not transgender. So I guess Palmer and I would fall under that.
And I guess we should say that when
haven't
we say
You haven't decided. Okay.
gender, it would be what, like, we're actually talking your assigned sex at birth.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So we are males
So
That
it's
identify
your
as male.
that identifies.
it's your assigned gender at birth. Like your sex is male,
Sure,
right?
okay.
So that's like what biology has decided is a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But like when you were born and you had like the what people consider male genitalia, you were raised as a boy,
Okay.
right? So then if you were raised as a boy and then you at any point in time were like, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, or I'm one of these other genders that doesn't fall in the binary, then you would be identified as transgender. But if you were like, I was born a male and I was raised as a boy and I feel like I'm a man, then you're cisgender.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we revert back to sex, you know, I guess having genitalia or no, is that ever in question when one is like in this transition and thinking about the terms and stuff they want to use and being called? Because like, I mean, again, we talk about male or female as sex, and then I have like definitions under transgender, cisgender, non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid that use male and female within the definitions. And so,
Can you give me an
But-
example?
so non-binary applies to a person who does not identify as male or female.
See, I don't think that's necessarily true or like accurate because I identify as non-binary, but that's my gender. So it's like I don't identify as a man or as a woman,
Okay.
but I do identify as female.
that answers a lot of my questions. And I feel like that's a lot of our arguments that we have.
So
is
you identify reproductively as a female, but not in the mindset, or
so it's just like in terms of like what gender is, so like what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a man, which is all still like societal things that we've determined. So it's like if you're a woman, you like these things, you do these things. You
wear
feel
dresses, you like pink,
exactly.
you like flowers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like my gender identity doesn't align with that, and I don't feel like I am a girl.
Right.
So you don't feel like you're a girl by the social constructs of the definition.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that becomes the question, because some people say, okay, well, we wouldn't have had this issue at all if we weren't like specifically gender stereotyping. So like it's not that gender's the issue, but the stereotypes that we attach to that.
Gotcha.
Sure. Yeah. I can agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can totally agree with that.
But then there are still some trans people that like do like identify with their transness all the way down to sex. So there are some trans women that would say, yes, my sex is female. So that if, people who
So if they were a man, but now they're female.
So they don't say we don't use words like were or weren't, because some people just feel like that's what they've always been.
Always been. Yeah. Okay.
So it's just that you are assigned female or you're assigned male.
But now I am what I.
But what I am actually is female.
Okay.
So, and then there are some, some trans people that will go through like a biological transition. So either, top surgery, hormone therapy, things like that. And so that, that's something that not only will kind of like align your gender, but also your sex.
Yeah.
So it's like really nuanced, just because of the ways that like science and society are never always completely correct. So it's like people will be like, there's only two sexes. But that's not necessarily true either, because if you're saying like female is XX and male is XY, there's still a whole different bunch of ranges of different chromosomes you could have. So even just categorizing it like that is already dicey in and of itself. And then societally, when you then put gender in and then assign a gender to a sex. So if you say like, okay, if you're male, then that means you're a man and you act these ways. That's when we started getting like all these issues, because there's so many ways to be a person. And maybe I don't fit in with these things. And I also think it's interesting, though, because, like, when I was in my master's program for neuroscience, it's, like, the things that people will say are, like, sexually differentiated, like, parts of your brain, for example. So they'd say, like, if you look at a male brain, it looks like this, and you look at a female brain, it looks like this. They've looked at the brains of trans people and found that the opposite was true. So a female brain in a trans woman, even though you were saying like, oh well, your brain should be this way because you're male. So it's like even down to the science of it all. We don't necessarily know if the ways that we're categorizing it is even really true.
Well, and Steve had a good point on that we actually talked about in preparation yesterday. And I don't know if you specifically wanted to touch on this. I hope you don't mind if I bring it up. But like so again, going into the organic. Like, what it comes down to your chromosomes, to your brain. So 500-600 years from now, 1,000 years from now, when they find the bones of a trans man or trans woman, like, they're probably going to categorize them as whatever they were assigned as based on like bone structure, teeth, stuff like that. And like, I'm wondering, like, is that something that people think about now as, like, even after I die, I'm still going to be, like... Obviously, it's not going to be important to you because you're dead, but is it important to you now that after you die, you might still be identified as what you don't think that you are?
I mean, that's deep. So I'm going to start with, I hope that thousands of years from now, we're not doing gendered categories.
Right. Obviously, that's what we're...
Hopefully we figure it out, and then this is not a thing at all.
Sure.
But then it becomes a thing where it's like, there are, like, way more, like, intra-sex or intra-gender differences than there are, like, in between the two. So it's like, okay, if I see these bones, and I'm like, okay, these bones are this long and this big, so this must have been a male. It's like, that's possible. It's even likely. But it might not have been. There's still so many different people who are even cisgender that don't fit into what the societal or even biological categories are for that sex.
And I think they have found fossils before and, like, misgendered them and been like, oh, this is a man, and then, like, it comes to find out, like, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Like...
Right. It's just a profile.
Sure,
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
And again, like, I mean, maybe that man thousands of years ago, maybe he wasn't the hunter-gatherer, like, butch type. Maybe he was, like, a bitch-ass motherfucker. Like, you know what I mean? Like, right, like, he was like, look, I'm not gonna fight. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and again, like, that's where, and I say that just to, like, kind of, like, make fun of the like you said, like, the social constructs that someone defines the term by. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's cool. That's interesting. I'm definitely, like, learning a lot right now.
Yeah, no, I learn a lot every day. I'm like, oh, this is so weird. Like,
Yeah.
what does this mean?
Yeah.
Cool. So another one of my questions was, what are some points you could give guys like us that are misunderstood by the whole topic, and how we can help to bridge the gap other than having conversations like this at a podcast? Like, there are things that we can do in our daily lives.
Yeah, so for one, it's like, it's great that you're having discussions like this in a podcast, because you have listeners who listen to you because, like, okay, yeah, I relate to these guys because they have lives and look like me and that. So, you know, you're reaching people that might not necessarily have ever thought of these things.
Right.
Super
That's
cool.
our goal. Yeah.
Yeah. But then I guess it's like outside of spaces like this, it's like if I'm like see you next week at a Starbucks saying some like homophobic shit, I'm be like, oh, what's up?
Right.
So I think it's like outside of places where you're like being held accountable, like what do you do when no one's watching, or like when your other cis dude bro friend says some like, oh my god, that's so gay, meaning something, do you correct him? Or it's like, if ANDE isn't there, do you just use she, her pronouns because no one cares because they're not around? So it's like those things where it's like, are you holding yourself and other people accountable? That's like the main thing.
Right.
And then it's also like, I think just like being like actively like trying to learn. So it's like, you know, you're learning about this, you're, you know, researching, getting prepared. And like, I think that's a big thing too, because I think to a large extent, a lot of people, it's just like, they literally just don't know. Not even like they...
Yeah, and I think at this point too, like, you're correct, like, people don't know, and I think at this point it's, the culture itself has developed and become increasingly, like, more and more, like, socially acceptable and popular, that at this point if people don't know, they're afraid to ask.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. And also, I think it's like, the thing about, like, we've also evolved to the point where, like, the internet has so much information, and so, like, maybe don't ask me to explain my whole life, but if you don't know what, like, transgender means, like, Google it.
Trust me, if you've watched porn, you know what transgender is. Because, like, it comes up regardless of whether you want it to or not. Like, it's just there. Like,
yeah, so there's a lot of things
doesn't
where
matter
I'm
what you
like,
search.
there's a lot of things where I'm like, okay, people just don't know, but then it's like, are you willfully ignorant because you're just not going out and seeking this information because you don't have to and it doesn't affect you?
Sure.
But, like, if you are a person living in 2018 and you definitely, like you said, like, even if it's not porn, like, you turn on the TV and
you
there's
should have
news about
stumbled
trans
across
people,
it at some
there's all
point.
this stuff, and then you easily can just be like, let me find out more about this.
Well, and I know this is, you've probably been asked this question many times, and you're probably, like, tired of answering it. But, obviously, like, a lot of people bring up that, like, the trans community didn't get as much, like, and I know that, you know, you're being, like, the non-binary, but this is a lot of people like to bring up, like, the fact that, like, none of this, like, became, like, an equation or like a part of, like, the conversation until you had this white dude, Caitlyn Jenner, that decided to be a woman. I'm sorry. You had Bruce that decided, and so it's like this rich white man who decided that he wanted to be a woman, and like therein, like, people like construct a problem with that. Like, do you feel like that is negatively impacting, like, that culture specifically?
So the first thing is you don't say decided to be a woman. It's
Sorry,
not like
sorry,
you just like wake up and decide like
Sure, yeah. No, but I mean, like, that's how people
like
view
that's how
that.
people.
Yeah,
I was also say that is how a lot of people view it. But it's like Caitlyn Jenner, you know, came out one day and was like, this is actually what my gender is. So this is what it is now, guys. So you know. And I mean, it sucks that it has to be like a rich white woman coming out and saying this for people to listen or know about it. And also, it sucks because then people are like, oh my god, now trans issues are so like important and relevant, but it's like it's really only issues of like people who are in mainstream. It's like not like queer black women that are getting murdered that no one cares about.
Right, exactly. And that's my point, is that like a lot of the times like people look at it like, oh, this is like more of a glamorous thing now, where it's like, no, there are still people that struggle with this every day.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what the kind of the point that I wanted to make.
I've even heard the term like fad come across as like it just being a popular complex and like.
I don't really think
people
this is a
just doing it
fad.
just
Like,
to-
it's gonna, like,
That's
that's-
like really gross.
Yeah.
Yeah. Say that.
Yes, wow.
I've heard that.
like
yeah.
disrespectful.
clothings are fads.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
that's-
I mean,
That just means
I've
people
heard
were
people
in
were
hiding.
doing
No,
it
we're
just
not.
for
We're not
money.
saying you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make a way. 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 Hit the bank so ends can meet. Hit the bank, hit the bank, hit the bank. I'm trying to make a way.